Afternoon, here on Monday at 2 o'clock, and welcome to the webinar. Just checking here if we are live in Zoom. Give it 1 second. Great. Good afternoon. Welcome to this Gaming in Europe webinar, in which we'll provide some basic insights into the thought processes and behaviors that typically accompany problematic gambling. My name is Willem van Oort. Using these insights, we'll explore, first of all, how operators and other stakeholders can effectively communicate with problem gamblers. Second, the benefit of national gambling helplines. And third, the implications for effective prevention. Please note that we are hosting this webinar as part of the European Gaming and Betting Association's European Safer Gambling Week. The European Safer Gambling Week is an annual effort to raise awareness about safer gambling and to share insights among stakeholders on how this can be achieved. As we all know, gambling is not a risk-free product, and strong consumer protections are necessary to keep our industry sustainable. We are very glad that the EGBA is creating awareness for that, and we are more than happy to contribute to these efforts. Before we kick off today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors. Thank you all very much for your generous support. We would not be able to do this without you. Also, as always, our webinars are interactive. If you would like to participate in our poll or submit a question to one of our speakers, you can do so using the Slido app. To use Slido, please scan the QR code on the screen here or visit slido.com and then enter the event code #GIEU. That's #GIEU. Then finally select the Q&A tab on top of your screen and either submit the question or upvote somebody else's question. Questions will be addressed and, if possible, answered during the audience Q&A that will take place at the end of this webinar. We're very happy that we can welcome 3 expert speakers with us today. First of all, Annika Lindberg, counseling psychologist and trustee at Gordon Moody. Nathalie Smit, CEO of Loket Kansspel, which is the Netherlands' national gambling helpline. And last but not least, Pieter Remmers, Secretary General of the European Association for the Study of Gambling. Welcome, and thank you very much for being here. We are very glad to have you. Our first speaker today is Annika Lindberg, counseling psychologist and trustee at Gordon Moody. Annika has extensive practical experience with problem gamblers. Annika, thank you very much for being here. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I'm good.
Fantastic. Annika, the first question to you here today is, from a clinical perspective, how would you describe the essential character of problematic gambling behavior?
Right. So I think we want to start thinking about the difference, obviously, between somebody who perhaps previously has had a healthy relationship with gambling, which is signified by being able to have limits, a bit of boundaries, and at some point, and this could happen very suddenly or it could happen gradually over time, those boundaries get eroded. So there is a sense that the person is losing control over their gambling. They basically end up having a very different response to usually both wins and losses, which means that regardless of whether there is a win or a loss, the person is going to feel compelled to continue gambling, which ends them up in a chasing of those losses. Emotionally, at that point, it's the loss of control is subjectively a very negative experience for people, and as a result of feeling that control has been lost, often a whole host of negative emotions are generated. There is shame, there's a lot of regret, there may be add-on anxiety and incredibly low mood and sense of desperation really that sets in over time. There's also a lot of preoccupation. The thoughts about gambling are not prevalent just at the time when the person is gambling, but also a lot of the other times. And there is often a lot of kind of scheming and plotting for when one would be able to return and have another bet in order to kind of make it right for all of the losses that has been incurred.
Yeah.
I think One of the symptoms that I think is particularly relevant to operators to understand and maybe make themselves more aware of is the inner conflict that the gambler experiences. So even in treatment, that's something that's actually quite baffling, really, because you don't have a substance coming in. So within the same person, you have a part of them that perhaps is desperate to stop the gambling behavior, but yet there is another part that is basically very addicted and extremely invested in continuing to gamble. And in that position, the person's brain essentially generates a whole host of very, very distorted thought patterns. You have, outright illusions of their ability to win, illusions about their control over the gambling product that they're using, and lots and lots of denial. And I think that's something that operators particularly need to be aware of, that denial does not mean that the person doesn't have any insight, but they may still have a lot of denial when confronted by somebody outside of them about their issues.
Yeah. Okay. It's quite clarifying. Thank you, Annika. So this brings us to the second question. Loss of control. What are the causes of this loss of control, you think?
So that can be very multifactorial, actually. And I think the research has obviously illustrated a lot of quite diverse pathways into gambling addiction. And some of them are more about the kind of biological and psychological underpinnings and predispositions. So you got things like genetic loading playing a small part. You got, diagnosis of ADHD, for example. We got a very big overlap there, but also, backgrounds of trauma and psychiatric illness and so on can also predispose a gambler towards developing addiction. On the other side, you have environmental causes or triggers, really. So that could be, life events, divorces, losing a job, things that are basically causing a lot of emotional upheaval, which then means that the gambler is potentially during that episode more likely to get hooked because the emotional shift that the gambling is causing is a bit more addictive in that particular period of time. And then let's not forget that also exposure plays a role. So people wouldn't be developing a gambling addiction had it not been for the continuous exposure of the gambling itself. And of course, what you do see sometimes is that people can be safe with one particular form of gambling, but then they get introduced to a different type of gambling and actually get hooked immediately. Not dissimilar to how you can see drug addicts who are kind of not addicted to one type of drug, but are very, very prone to develop an addiction to another. So it's a little bit the same in gambling, actually.
Okay, this is very, very interesting to hear this from you, Annika. Just to remind everybody at home or in the office, you can still submit questions for Annika and the other speakers through Slido. So scan the QR code you see on the top, on the right side of the screen. Use the event code #GIEU, that's with a U at the end, and then select the Q&A tab on the top of your screen. Moving on to the last question, next question, Annika. If disordered gambling behavior is characterized by impulsivity and irrationality, can we still effectively communicate with problem gamblers?
Yeah. So I have done a lot of public speaking over the years in terms of how to communicate to people with gambling problems in various contexts and settings. And I think one of the things you often hear from those who are placed in the positions of having to have those conversations is that there's a lot of anxiety and fear of the defensiveness that you're likely to be up against. So I think that's why I mentioned earlier that I think developing a very thorough awareness of those symptoms is absolutely key, because unless you have a degree of insight and understanding, you might very easily get dissuaded by the type of response that you're getting from the person that you're approaching with a problem. So I think there's a lot to be said for setting the expectation right. What we're trying to do, I'm assuming now for a moment I'm an operator, is you're using some level objectivity, hopefully, like data or some sort of risk markers that you've been picking up on that indicate that this is a person who is definitely slipping into addiction, and it's your responsibility to do something about that. But when communicating that, I think there's a few things that really matter. So you need to be very objective. Again, you're not there to label or diagnose a person with anything. You're there to highlight that you're witnessing risky behaviors and that it is your responsibility to step in and put a stop to that in some way or another. So when you're then getting potential backlash or what have you, it's important to not get too caught up in that and just understand that this is part of their addiction. And actually, remember, they are at war with themselves already. They are in a conflict. And what you're getting is simply the external manifestation of that, because you're not there to have a debate with them. So it's a bit like if you're thinking about tough love with, say, teenagers or small children, you're not, if you're doing something that you know is right for that child or for that teenager, you're not going to be too concerned about how they respond to it. You're going to be comfortable in being a little bit more prescriptive because you know you're doing something that will help that person in the longer term. So I think that is something that's really, really important to remember in terms of how we communicate to gamblers. And of course, you then have a very large spectrum, right? So like those who are just about losing control, perhaps you can intervene on a much more gentle level with behavioral nudges and kind of introducing them to a timeout from the gambling just to ensure that they become aware of what they're doing and what the impact of the gambling is on their lives. But then at the stage where a person is blatantly with no control whatsoever, it's really important to understand that the symptoms, the hallmark symptoms, loss of control, inner conflict, are going to be completely at odds with them using control measures themselves. So that it's important to be that much more prescriptive at that point.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Annika, for explaining this so clearly. So I think now that we have a basic understanding of how problematic gamblers think and act, let's focus a bit more on how to communicate with problematic gamblers. Annika, see you in a bit at the Q&A. Thank you. And to help us address this issue, we are now joined by Nathalie Smit, who is CEO of Loket Kansspel, the Netherlands National Gambling Helpline. Hey, Nathalie, welcome back, and thank you for being here. How are you?
Thanks, Willem. Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks.
That's good. That's good. Nathalie, first question to you is: do you recognize what Annika said about the difficulties of communicating with problematic gamblers? And as a professional helpline, how do you tackle this problem?
Yeah, I do. I do recognize the difficulties, and especially, well, not really the problem gamblers, but the classical pathological gamblers who are always like in a big denial. It's really difficult to get through actually to them. But also the part about what she said about that they are actually having an in conflict within themselves, like this very ambivalence about stopping or just continue gambling. You know, that's actually what you're doing is wrong, but you're still continuing. And we are at our helpline like very keen on this process in people. Once they are like very ambivalent, we try to put like a spotlight on there. So we make actually this feeling a bit bigger because it's a very uncomfortable feeling, right? To be ambivalent about something.
Yeah.
So that really works actually if it's just a problem gambler. So if it's someone who is really regretting and ashamed, it's really good to acknowledge these feelings as well and make the ambivalence greater. But once it's a pathological gambler, it's really difficult to communicate in this kind of techniques. It's you need to be more subtle. You need to be more maybe a little bit indirect. Once you say, because the pathological gambler, those are the ones who are actually not really calling into our helpline. Hence, they are like really in denial. And at the same time, maybe they are more visible at the operator's side because they're like still in denial, gambling like a lot, spending a lot of time online, but still at the same time think that they are like very skilled and don't have any problem at all actually. So I think they need a different approach. We usually try to, ask more keen questions to them, like questions, for example, like what do you think yourself about the amount of time you're gambling right now? And it's not really a solution, but at least it's a crack in the shell, because they're gonna think a bit more about their own behavior once they leave the chat, for example, with the customer care agent at the operator. Because they are more in a stage, they need to get more aware of what they are doing, and it's really difficult to raise the awareness at them.
Yeah, understood. Very interesting thoughts and observations here, Nathalie. Once again, to everybody in the office or at home, don't forget you can submit questions to Nathalie and the other speakers through Slido. Scan the QR code on the right side of your screen, enter the event code GIE, and finally select the Q&A tab on top of the screen. Continuing to the next question, Nathalie. So, do you think gambling operators, are sufficiently equipped to effectively communicate with problem gamblers?
Well, of course, at the moment, I think they are working really hard to get there. And at the same time, they need specialistic employees who are equipped with skills to handle and see through pathological gamblers, because I think that's very important. Most of them, they are at the operator, so they are like more visible at their side. I'm not really sure if they are like sufficiently equipped to, but I think it's possible to hire more like equipped employees, maybe social workers or people who are more keen to signalize pathological gamblers.
Room for improvement, listening to you here. Nathalie, last question to you here today is about effective communication with problem gamblers from a prevention perspective. You think that there are advantages to having a single national gambling helpline like you run in the Netherlands?
Well, I think it's good that we have a single helpline in the Netherlands right now, because help opportunities were very scattered in the past. So actually, one of the reasons to get one central point of help in the Netherlands was that reason. I think, I think help and therapy, such as help and therapy, is a very local product, and with a helpline like ours, it can help people to navigate actually to the help they need in their own living area. So that was very needed in the Netherlands. And also problem gambling. Problem gambling, it needs a very like specific approach. So it's good to have like a special helpline for people with gambling problems or questions about gambling behavior.
Thank you, Nathalie, and maybe an inspiration for the surrounding countries around the Netherlands. Nathalie, thank you. We'll see you later at the Q&A, but it was very interesting so far. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So this brings us to the final speaker of today, Pieter Remmers, who you probably know as the Secretary General of the European Association for the Study of Gambling, EASG. Welcome, Pieter, and thank you very much for joining us today. And congrats on your Rome conference. We heard very good things about it. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm okay, Willem. Perfect. I mean, lots of work to do, so that's good.
Good. So let's kick off with the first question to you here, Pieter. As you know, a recent evaluation of the Netherlands Remote Gambling Act found that player protection in the Dutch online market fell short of a minimum acceptable standard. So this leads us to two related questions, Pieter. First, do you share this assessment? And then second, in your opinion, is too much being asked of the operators regarding player protection? Not just in the Netherlands, but perhaps in other countries as well. So your thoughts,
Okay, thank you very much. And you probably want an honest answer from me, I assume, or?
please, please.
Okay, so honestly, the answer is I'm not sure. At the end of the day, I always think, and that's what I always see happening as well, is that there is not a one size fits all solution, so to say. In fact, it looks a bit like, if you look at the things that we are supposed to do, it looks like one size fits none. I think safer gambling solutions, responsible gambling issues, they all need to be tailor made and in that direction. And then maybe you can
Yeah,
compare it a little bit with things like we use in marketing principles. It's not the old general marketing that we are having these days. No, everything is being personalized. And I think we should do the same with responsible gambling in that way. So, in fact, we are always looking at, let's say, the minimum standards that are applicable and necessary to fulfill the duty of care. If you look at what all the politicians in the Dutch parliament think and know about what's going on. And yes, of course, operators have to be responsible, but at the very same time, without the responsibility of the players and the emphasis on that, you don't get very far, so to say. So, maybe as an example, 5 years ago, when I was doing a lot of presentations, my very first slide, my very last slide, always was, but at the end of the day, it's the individual player who is responsible for his or her own behavior. I'm not allowed to say that anymore because operators are made co-responsible, and that's not bad, but you have to keep in mind that if you look at standards on player protections, which are good, but that you have to take into account that at the end of the day, the individual player has to change his behavior if he wants to achieve another thing. So what Annika mentioned in regard to denial, and I think Nathalie mentioned that as well. I think that's one of the most important issues in the whole process. And because
Yeah,
if you, as an operator, talk to someone of whom you think that someone is might is developing a problem, he will always deny that a thing like that is going on. So if you look at those principles, we should do more. But I mean, um, and AI can be helpful in that, but it's not the one and only solutions. I know operators that think, yeah, but we have implemented AI, so now everything is okay. So we know what to do. It's good, but it's not good enough.
great. So personalization and co-responsibility here from you. Thank you, Peter. So
Well,
bringing us
honestly,
to the
that's
second question. Yeah,
okay. No, because honestly, and that is what is the general opinion as well, that we are all responsible, and that's maybe has to do with the fact that what can operators do, or what can other stakeholders do, and what is the most important thing that you could do. Honestly, I think that's listening to each other and work together. And these are the things that are lacking a little bit nowadays, and not only in the country that we are living in, the Netherlands, where you have uh, uh, treat people working in the treatment area and in the research area that have difficulty in communicating with operators, etc. But I think we can't do without each other. We have to listen and work together, and that is for regulators, that is for operators, researchers, academic, prevention and treatment experts, and don't forget the players themselves. Eh? Um, I was attending another webinar this morning. I think the first one, Mike Griffiths was mentioning the number of screening instruments that are available nowadays. And I have this list of 40 screening instruments, and maybe even more than 20 different treatment methods, including self-help. And then the question is, what is the best solution? But there is no best solution. It depends on the gambler, the problem, the behavior, and many more aspects. So not only listening is not enough. We all have to play our role and work together. By the way, and that's what we never mention, because we always say, yeah, we need to do more treatment, we need to do more. We know that from all those who have developed a real gambling problem, 30% of them stop their behavior without help from the outside, so to say. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do nothing. No, we have to check and find out what we really should do and focus on. And maybe, and that's what I think is important, we should focus on less of more instead of more of less. And what do I mean with that? Usually we say, okay, but this is the best treatment, this is the best treatment possibility. And I always think, since we are individualizing our world and also the way we are working together with our customers as an operator, but also the players, the gamblers in a treatment situation, give them those things that are necessary for them in developing healthy behavior.
Fantastic. There's a lot of deep insight here, Pieter. Thank you very much once again. Before we move on to the audience Q&A, final quick reminder to our viewers that you can submit your questions through the Slido app. Point your camera, your mobile to the screen, the QR code on the top right bottom of the screen. Use the event code #GIE, and there you can submit the last question or upvote somebody else's question. I think we have a few questions coming in here. Let's have a look. Yes, can we have the first question, please? To all of you or somebody else in particular, are there reliable signs of a problem player's inner conflict? Maybe that's more, I guess it's all in your expertise field, but maybe Nathalie is that, or Nathalie, I mean...
I'm not sure if this is, for example, if from the operator's perspective of view or just at the helpline, but let's do the helpline.
At the helpline,
Well, actually, everything what somebody says, what is very in conflict is actually very reliable, because that's actually this ambivalence is very personal. You just have to listen very good to what they say. I don't have unreliable examples at the moment as well. So it's just when somebody talks about that they just try to stop, or for example, they are in the Crux register, which is our register for exclusion, and they are at the same time saying, I think I'm ready for gambling. That's also like a very reliable sign, because nobody is after just 6 months completely ready to safe gamble, for example. So I think everything what is very in conflict is very reliable. You have to be keen on it and good listening to it.
Great. Annika or Pieter, anything to add?
I could add I suppose if you're coming from an operator's perspective and you're thinking more about the kind of output of what would that inner conflict look like on a graph or something like that, you'd be seeing a person who perhaps allocates limits one day, tries to remove them the following day, opts in for self-exclusion only to then, withdraw that a couple of days later. So those kind of flip-flapping between type behaviors would be quite a strong indicator of somebody who is not completely with the same mindset every single day of the week.
Yeah, quite clear. Pieter,
I agree on that. To be honest, what Annika is saying, and I think if you look at this, let's say from an operator's point of view, what can you do with it, and how do you communicate? Because that's one of the other questions as well. Uh, I mean, people working in this industry are not social workers, not psychologists, or whatever, and they always try to defend themselves, saying we are not that kind of people, so to say. But they can play a role in the early stages of changing behavior of the gambler. And I think the most important part is then the pre-contemplation. I'm a fan of motivational interviewing, so it's about pre-contemplation and contemplation phase, so to say. And then, in fact, every signal that a player gives you, you have to take it serious. You have to take it serious because uh, if we go back to the denial part of the story, is that reliable or not? Absolutely, I would say 100. I would say 100%. So
Yeah.
work with it and do with it, but you're limited as an operator, to be honest. Annika has been studying for at least 6 years to become a good psychologist, and Nathalie the same probably. I'm not a psychologist.
But it's
No, a
I
lot
think
of
it's
good.
very doable once you see somebody going offline and online or setting limits and
Uh,
then erase the limits or whatever, like this very ambivalent behavior.
Yeah.
It's actually very easy to say to someone like it seems like
uh,
you're not really know what you want. So and that's
Mm.
well,
makes
yeah,
somebody
maybe
really
maybe
ambivalent.
that's the
Yeah.
term that maybe that's the term that I always use because I never say you are addicted or you are a problem gambling. I always try to look at behaviors and think this is not normal behavior. And of course, there are differences in what we think about what is normal and what is not. But we don't have to accuse people from having a gambling problem at once, or so to say. So look at it in a
Yeah.
Yeah.
more general way.
I think
Great.
coming back to what I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
I think where a lot of people get kind of caught up is where they expect a certain response from the person, and I think I can't emphasize that enough. It's like when you
Yeah.
because the people who are making those approaches are rarely social workers or psychologists in the context of running the gambling business. You just have to figure out what is it that I'm communicating here. Well, I'm communicating that the person's gambling pattern is sort of showing markers of potential harm or riskiness, etc., etc. But don't kind of attach yourself to a particular answer from the gambler. You can't expect an admission, for example. You are simply putting it out there and giving them perhaps some room and time away from the gambling to reflect on that. And I think that process is so important. That's what we use, like Nathalie and myself, I'm sure in therapy as well. Not all gamblers, even who are treatment seekers, are going to sit here and just kind of say, oh, I'm such a problematic gambler, like I absolutely need help. You continue to see that kind of fluctuating motivation to get well, and therefore your job is to point out where you observe problem behaviors, not to get them to agree with you.
Yeah. Great. I think covered a lot of angles with this question. Thank you very much. Let's see what the second audience question was here today. And we have the second question, please. As a PPT department, what programs, courses are best to support vulnerable/problem gamblers with potential suicidal ideologies, and how can we navigate this? A lot of dense question here. Um,
Well, honestly, is this
think
is
it,
this a question for one of the operators? I mean, because honestly, we are dealing with in another role. We are dealing with a lot of training related to problem gambling and responsible gambling, so to say. If you look at
yeah,
suicide, we always emphasize that an operator should have and use a suicide protocol. What are we going to do in what stage? And I know there are a number of operators, also in the Netherlands, but also on an international scale, that are paying attention to those things. But that's, I would say, 100% necessary. And don't think you are the one who is going to find the solution for the problem, but you have to learn how to act in a normal way if you have someone who's trying to tell you within 5 seconds I'm going to jump off the bridge and don't try to stop me.
Yeah. So training here. Anything to add, ladies?
I guess
If not,
there's a lot to be said for training, and unfortunately I can't pinpoint one particular course or program, but of course trainings on suicidality, how to approach somebody who is suicidal, similarly how to speak to somebody with addiction. There are those courses out there, but just as a kind of general rule of thumb, I think there's also a lot to be said for just simply being human. Often when you call a call center nowadays, you get this sort of manualized, very scripted response, which doesn't feel empathetic, it doesn't feel real. And I think most people have it in them to just be compassionate listeners, actually. So simply listening, being available, attend to what the person is saying can go a really, really long way, and that's easy to forget.
And you can learn a lot, probably, Willem, in the Netherlands we have a national helpline on suicide prevention, and I assume that is the same in a lot of other countries. And you can learn what to do and how to deal with issues like this as well, using the general mental health service in that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this also links
Yeah,
back
we
to
do use
Nathalie's
their
statement
protocol
about
as well.
improvements. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. I think fantastic answer. Last question for the expert speakers here. Third question that we'd like to run to you today: through the RG interventions be externally run from gambling operators? So removing potential conflict of interest. Good question. Pieter, Nathalie, to start with? Don't know.
Yeah, Germans would say "jein," which means yes and no. And honestly, I think that's what it is about. I'm always very much in favor of, let's say, work together with the industry, together with other stakeholders, so to say, including those who are involved in prevention and treatment activities. A potential conflict of interest. It depends on how you have organized your customer support department as an online operator, or could be the same in land-based situations as well. So the ones who are working in the prevention department or are dealing with responsible gambling interventions should be able to do this independently from, let's say, the line organization that an operator can have. So I'm not afraid of a potential conflict of interest. Absolutely not. I think we should even focus on working with more people together, more different stakeholders.
Nathalie or Annika, anything? If not, it's also fine.
Yeah, no, I echo parts of what Pieter is saying there. I guess there is pluses and minuses with both, right? Like on one hand, if it was only run by the operators, potentially it would seem, or could appear anyway, a bit biased. So from my perspective, I think the collaboration that Pieter alluded to earlier between health professionals, researchers, people who are working on the front line seeing these people, and also, let's not forget, lived experience. You can learn so much if there is better collaboration between all of us, and if at that point you can use some of the knowledge derived from that to intervene, I think it will show that it comes from kind of different robust sources.
Yeah. Last comment, Nathalie. If not, it's also fine. Interventions.
Yeah, I echo actually also both of you. And also, yeah, we need to avoid the situation actually that it's completely at the operator or completely externally. It needs to be a mix because the operator needs to feel some responsibility to take care of their problem gamblers as well,
Yeah.
and also the need to have like a good collaboration with other stakeholders to referral correctly, yeah,
Yeah.
and adequately.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, Annika, Nathalie, and Pieter for joining us here in the webinar. So we're 45 minutes into the webinar. I think we're slowly wrapping this up. Again, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and answering the questions. I'm certain that the insights were very much appreciated. Thank you very much. And with
Thank
this,
you.
we've come to the end of this Gaming in Europe webinar. I hope you find it useful. A link to a full recording of today's webinar will be shared in a post-webinar email that you'll be receiving in the next couple of days. As always, let's keep in touch. If you have not signed up to our newsletters or magazines yet, please do so at www.gamingin.eu. That's gamingin.eu. Let's stay in touch and see you next time. Thank you very much.